Hello everyone and welcome to Ask Tom for Database Security for August 2018. This month's topic is going to be Oracle 18c New Security Features. Just a reminder that this call is recorded and that recordings for past sessions are available on the AskTOM website. Just click All Sessions to view recordings. AskTOM is intended to provide a direct channel into the product development team here at Oracle. My team is the database security team. We're the ones who create and develop products for encrypting, managing access, auditing the database. Anything to do with securing the Oracle database generally falls under our team. It is a free and open forum. You can ask questions you can't get answered elsewhere, and each section normally includes whatever product announcements there are since the last month. We'll have some technical topic each month. This month is database security in 18c, and then a question and answer period that is not limited to the technical topic. Whatever you want to ask about is fair game. If we don't know the answer, we'll get your contact information, do our best to find out for you. Because we're a global company and we have a global customer base, we do 2 sessions each month. There will be one at 9 o'clock Universal Time and another at 20 UTC, and the hope is that we can find some session that will work within your normal workday. For product announcements this month, obviously, given today's topic, 18c is available now, both in cloud and on Exadata, where it's been for several months, but we've also released for on-premises Linux and Solaris. We continue to work on Windows AIX and HPUX. You'll see those out over the coming weeks. And we do intend to release an 18c version of Oracle Express Edition. And just a reminder from last month, Express Edition will now include Advanced Security, Database Vault, and Label Security. We talked last month a little bit about Key Vault Bundle Patch 7 that did release on time in July, with the features being, major new features being support for UEFI boot. If you're running on hardware that doesn't support legacy BIOS, we do now support UEFI boot installs. We've backported AIX support all the way back to 5.3. We had some customers that are still running on that older version and needed it. But the big new feature in Bundle Patch 7 is the ability to centrally manage endpoints. We now give you the ability to control your endpoint configuration from the Key Vault console rather than having to travel to each endpoint and update configuration files. So you'll see 2 new screens in Key Vault. One of them is per endpoint. You can control the settings at each individual endpoint, and the other is global. You can set global settings that are across all endpoints unless overridden by individual endpoints. We also have a new support note this month that you might want to be aware of. That is note 2431549.1. With Bundle Patch 7, we've seen a few customers that have had an issue after installing the bundle patch where the System tab becomes unavailable after the bundle patch is installed. This isn't happening everywhere, but it has happened to enough that it was worth releasing a note on it. If that happens to you, don't panic. You don't need to revert the patch or the bundle patch. All you need to do is go to My Oracle Support, go to this note number, and that'll link you to the patch that fixes the issue with the system status page. We will have a permanent fix in both an upcoming Bundle Patch 8 for 12.2 and, of course, in the 18.1 release, which is due out later this year. That takes us to today's technical topic, which is going to be database security new features for Oracle 18c. And we're going to start with the core database, and in particular, we're going to start at the very beginning because security starts with the Oracle binary install. Starting with 18c, you're able to have read-only Oracle homes. This is a fantastic new feature because what it lets you do is it lets you put another barrier in the way of an attacker, particularly one who might try and either modify or completely replace the binaries inside of your Oracle home. To use this new feature, all you need to do is unzip the install binaries into wherever you want your Oracle home to be, use Run Installer to do a software-only install, and the Run Installer is configuring the software now, and then run a new utility called rootctl with the flag -enable to make the Oracle home read-only. And at this point, what you get is the binaries completely separate from configuration and log files, which will be under Oracle Base. Password files now move to Oracle Base DBS for Unix or Linux and Oracle Base Database for Windows. But completely separating out the changeable files, the dynamic files from the binaries, really simplifies patching. It makes provisioning a database a whole lot easier, and of course the improved security is well worth the time of doing this. Also new in 18C is a feature in RMAN that allows you to duplicate a database, either a standalone database or a pluggable, into another database and encrypt it during the duplication. So I can move from unencrypted to encrypted state very easily using this new syntax. We still have, as we've discussed in previous sessions, for 12.2 and above, the ability to do online tablespace conversion to encrypted. That's still probably your preferred methodology if you can use it. We still have the capability that was introduced for 12.1 and backported to 11.204 to do offline tablespace conversion, but now we've added yet one more way to encrypt your database using RMAN. Do note that this new syntax is not supported for creating a standby database. It can't be used to duplicate a pluggable database within the same CDB, and it's not going to be worthwhile for point-in-time recovery. It is for a complete change of the database. We've also made some changes to Connection Manager in 18C, and we've added a new Traffic Director mode. And Traffic Director lets us do a couple of things. One of the really interesting things is tenant isolation between pluggable databases. So you've always been able to control traffic within Connection Manager, but now we have given you finer grained control so that it's not done at the listener level. It can actually be done at the pluggable database level. And that's going to be a valuable new feature for anyone who's rolling out a large multi-tenant operation. Another thing that we've done in Connection Manager 18C is we give you the capability to terminate TCPS traffic at the Connection Manager. So you can have client to Connection Manager traffic be encrypted with TCPS and have Connection Manager to database traffic be unencrypted with straight TCP. There's two advantages to this. One advantage is it offloads the work of decrypting that network traffic from the database server. And TCPS is a fairly expensive operation in terms of performance. So offloading that work is valuable. The other thing that this does for us is if we want to use database firewall for monitoring or blocking, it allows us to use firewall to read that TCP traffic. As you probably know, database firewall is capable of reading native network encryption. So if you're using Oracle native network encryption, no problem with firewall reading it. But if you're using TCPS, firewall requires TCPS be terminated. Now you have a utility to do that for you. Another great feature in Oracle 18C are schema-only accounts. These are accounts that cannot log into the database because they have no authentication token assigned, no password. So that you can't possibly log into them. It's not a matter of guessing the password or brute forcing it. There just isn't one. Schema-only accounts are good for schemas that contain data objects, but where my application paradigm is to have a containing schema for the objects and then a using schema to access those objects. So think of eBusiness Suite where your schema objects are in HR or OE or PER or something like that, and your using schema is apps. All the database logins are as apps, and then apps has privileges to access the tables in the different schema. That'd be a great place for something like this. Schema-only accounts can either be created using the new no authentication syntax, or you can take an existing schema and alter it to be schema-only, but just an alter user, give it the username, no authentication. Just some notes about this. You can use schema-only accounts for proxy authentication, so you can log in as another user, and if you've got the appropriate privileges, proxy to the schema-only account. You can't use these accounts if they have administrative privileges, as we discussed in last month's AskTOM. So if you have sysdba, syskm, sysrack, then these won't work for you. You also can't use these since there is no login token for database links. They're only really intended for use as containing schemas. Moving on, we come to a major new feature in 18C, and that is a new capability for Active Directory integration. Prior to 18C, we gave you Active Directory integration in two formats. One of them was authentication integration, where you would use Kerberos, Active Directory Kerberos, hooked into the database. So when it came time to log in, the token that was checked was your Kerberos token, and as long as you had obtained that from Active Directory successfully, had the right username and password for Active Directory, then you got into your database. The other methodology was Enterprise User Security, EUS. And EUS gave you authentication, but it also gave you user identification, give it the username, and it gave you authorization. What privileges do you have? The challenge with Enterprise User Security is that it requires an extra directory. You couldn't hook the database directly to Active Directory. So you would have users coming to the database going over Enterprise User Security to one of the Oracle directory services. That could be Internet Directory, it could be Virtual Directory, or it could be the new Unified Directory. And then one of those three directories would be connected to the Active Directory. So for some customers, this was more infrastructure and more complexity than they wanted to manage, and we got a lot of requests to make this easier. We've done that in 18C with centrally managed users. Now what you have is user comes to database using CMU goes directly to Active Directory. There are a lot of similarities between centrally managed users and Enterprise User Security. Authentication, for example. Just like with EUS, you have three options for authentication. One of those is Kerberos, and this is still the one that we believe most people are going to use. Active Directory includes its own Kerberos key distribution center. Database can consume those Kerberos tickets. This is probably your best way to authenticate EUS or CMU. Another option is certificates. Microsoft includes certificate authorities with their Windows Server. Those can produce PKI certificates, which the database can consume, and so your database can use those to log in. The third way is username and password. Just like with Enterprise User Security, if you want to log in to a centrally managed user as using password, then that means that you have to have somewhere available a password verifier that contains the hash representation of the user's password, now the password within Active Directory. That's typically a challenge because to do the password authentication, you're going to have to make Active Directory do some things it doesn't normally do. And what you're going to do is you're going to install a password filter. This is a DLL that you'll place on the domain controller, on every domain controller, and you're going to make an extension to the Active Directory schema to store the password hashes that the filter generates. Okay, so you'll install the filter, you'll extend the schema. Now that you've got that filter installed, you're now ready to begin generating password hashes. And when you do that, when you're generating these password verifiers, just like if you were using standalone database, completely forget about Enterprise User Security or CMU, you want to control which verifiers are created. Now in a standalone database, you control this by using login versions and SQLnet.aura. In an Active Directory environment, you control it by using database or Active Directory groups, and which groups a user belongs to determines which types of verifiers are going to be generated. Centrally managed users supports the Active Directory account policies that you would expect it to. If you're using password, when your password is created, that's being done in Active Directory, so complexity, expiration, number of failed logins, these are all respected within the password policy. If you're using Kerberos, it's all done in Active Directory, so your Kerberos timeout, time to live, that's all managed just the way it is with anything else in Active Directory. If you start having failed logins with centrally managed users, that will increment the failed login count within Active Directory, so you will eventually get to the point where you expire or lock your account because you've had too many failed logins. Works just the way you would think it would. Also similar to enterprise user security, but in some cases slightly different, is authentication or identification and authorization. Just like with enterprise user security, CMU supports both exclusive or dedicated user mapping, and it supports shared schema mapping. Just like with enterprise user security, centrally managed users supports database role to Active Directory group. And just like with enterprise user security, we allow users with administrative privileges, sysdbea, syskm, sysrac, to be defined using Active Directory logins. Okay? Now, for authorization, specifically for exclusive user mapping, this is a one-to-one mapping, and your syntax is identical to enterprise user security. You're going to create the user in the database, identified globally using the Active Directory distinguished name. One-to-one, no change from what you did in enterprise user security. Shared schema mapping is going to be a little different. With enterprise user security, shared schema mapping was based on the directory tree structure. You could map a shared schema in the database to some point within the directory tree, and that point within the directory tree, all users under that tree would now belong to the shared schema. This was a great idea 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when the paradigm for managing Active Directory was to have large, complex directory information trees. But Microsoft changed those recommendations back around 2008, and now what you see is most Active Directory deployments use a flat organizational structure. So instead of using organizational structure, we are now using groups to handle shared schema. So a shared schema in the database now maps to all users who belong to a specific group within Active Directory. Role mapping is done just the way it was in enterprise user security. I have my global role in the database, which maps to the distinguished name of a group in Active Directory. But the place where we store the mapping has changed. Prior to centrally managed users in enterprise user security, role mappings and shared schema mappings were all contained within an Oracle directory. With centrally managed users, the mappings are now contained within the data dictionary of the database. Okay. For administrative privileges, it works the same way with centrally managed users as it works with enterprise user security. You're going to create your schema in the database. You're going to grant that user the appropriate administrative privilege, sysdba, sysrac, sysbackup, syskm, and then you're going to map that schema in the database to either an exclusive user or a shared schema the same way you would any other user. Let's take a quick look at how this might work. Suppose what I've got is a container in Active Directory called users. And inside that container I have lots of users, but 3 of those users happen to be Susan, Diana, and Jennifer. I'm going to create a group in Active Directory to contain Susan, Diana, and Jennifer. I'll call that group HR Rep. I can call it whatever I want to. I'm going to create a schema in the database called HR Runtime. And I want to map HR Runtime to Susan, Diana, and Jennifer in Active Directory, to this HR Rep group in Active Directory. My syntax for doing that is going to be create user HR Runtime, identified globally as this new group that I created in Active Directory. And I'll use the distinguished name for the group. Let's take this example a little further. I now want to move authorization up into the directory. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new group in Active Directory called HR Manager. And I'll only put the people I want to have the HR Manager role in the database in this group. So I create the HR Manager group in Active Directory. I add Susan to that group. Next, in the database, I create a role called HR Manager. And just like I did with the shared schema, I map that role, HR Manager, to the group HR Manager in Active Directory. And my syntax for doing that is create role HR Manager, identified globally as, and give it the distinguished name of the group in Active Directory. Now, 18C has been out in the cloud for several months now. We've had a few people that have been playing with centrally managed users, and one question we often get is, which should I use, enterprise user security or centrally managed users? And it depends on what you're trying to do. There is a lot of overlap between the two capabilities. Centrally managed users is easier to implement, easier to maintain than enterprise user security. It does functionally most of the things that enterprise user security does. So if you're on 18C, centrally managed users is the right choice, unless you want to do one of the things that CMU doesn't cover. Those things are, CMU doesn't do database links. If you want to have your database links defined in your directory, you have to do enterprise user security. CMU doesn't do user assignment to labels for Oracle Label Security. CMU doesn't do XML database. CMU doesn't allow you to define mappings in the directory that are applicable across all databases. That is stuff you do with enterprise user security. But for most of our customers, we think the way forward is going to be CMU. Much easier to deploy, much easier to manage. Okay? Let's move from there to Database Vault. One of the great new features that we built into Database Vault in 12C was simulation mode. And simulation mode in 12.2 made Database Vault much, much easier to deploy than it was in earlier versions because you remove some of the risk in deploying Database Vault. With simulation mode, you could declare a Database Vault policy with whatever rules you needed and make that policy non-enforcing. You could then run for a little while and check to see what violations you were going to get. And when you got to a point where your violations were acceptable, where you weren't blocking things that you actually wanted to let through, you could turn simulation off and make your policies enforcing. In 18C, we fine-tuned that simulation mode a little bit. One of the things that we've done is if you have a realm violation in a SQL statement, we now capture all violations for the statement, not just the first one we encounter. Imagine a complex SQL statement that is accessing multiple different tables within a database. That's very common. Well, prior to 18C, the first one you hit that violated a realm generated the violation, and that's what was recorded in the simulation log. You would never know that you had other realm violations until you fixed the first one and ran it again, get another violation, fix that one, run it again, get another violation. See what I mean? Now we capture all of the violations for the SQL statement with one pass. The second thing we've done for simulation mode in 18C is we now capture the full call stack. And the reason we do this is if you have a complex SQL statement with a lot of correlated queries and activity, it's possible that what's actually firing your violation is a subquery within the statement. Capturing the full stack lets you trace back to the entire originating SQL statement. Much more valuable for identifying where your problems lie. The third thing that we've done in simulation mode in 18C is in addition to gathering the statement and the call stack, we also now gather the context factors. IP address, client identifier, program module, and this can help you identify the offending module. All of these things work together to make simulation mode even more valuable in 18C for a quick and easy rollout of Database Vault. Speaking of making things easier, we have added 4 new Database Vault factor functions to 18C. We've added a factor for client identifier, for database link information, for program module, and for proxy user. These are things that you could have done prior to 18C using syscontext user env, but that is a little bit more work than just using a factor name. So since we commonly see people that are doing these factors, we've now created factors for them, and it'll make creating your Database Vault rules a little bit simpler. But wait, there's more. We've also added support, direct support for database replay into Database Vault. So if you are using Database Replay, you no longer need to grant sweeping Database Vault privileges. Instead, what you can do is specifically authorize Database Capture and Database Replay within Database Vault with the attendant rules and configurations around that. Okay. We've made some improvements to Unified Audit, another feature that we introduced in 12C, and probably one of my favorite new features. If you aren't using Unified Audit now, you really should take a look at it. At some point, we plan to get rid of the old traditional audit and move everything into Unified Audit. But one of the things that we allow you to do, which moves us to feature parity with traditional audit, is you can now choose to write the Unified Audit trail directly to syslog rather than the Unified Audit tables. What this does for you is it allows you to place your Unified Audit in something that is not owned by the database. You can send it to a remote syslog server. It just gives you more capability to protect your audit trail. Keep in mind the Unified Audit trail is already immutable. Okay, so an average user or DBA can't get in and delete Unified Audit trail. This just gives you more protection for it. Just like with traditional audit, there is a cost to going to syslog, and that cost is we are bound by the restrictions placed on syslog. In most operating systems, the size of a syslog message is limited, and that is no different for Unified Audit. And as a result, instead of getting the full audit trail, what you get is a subset of the audit trail. Okay. Next thing we've done is Unified Audit trail can be exported with Data Pump. Prior to 18C and 12C, if you did a full database export, that did not include the Unified Audit trail. As of 18C, we automatically include the Unified Audit trail in a full database export and import. We also allows you to explicitly include the audit trail with the new include audit trail syntax inside of Data Pump. Okay. We've got some nice new features for encryption and advanced security. One of the big ones is we have given you two new initialization parameters, wallet root and TDE configuration. Wallet root is static and specifies the location of the encryption key store. And if you're using SQLnet.aura, it overrides encryption wallet location within SQLnet.aura. The other one we've given you is TDE configuration, which allows you to specify what type of key store you're using. Are you using wallet or are you using HSM? These features are available both in single tenant and in multi-tenant databases, and what this means is you now have the capability to specify on a PDB by PDB basis which key stores are used for which databases. Great new way to manage your keys and not have one PDB interfere with another PDB. We've also given you the ability to bring your own key into transparent data encryption, so you can generate a key from outside of the database. And we've made some minor modifications to the administer key management syntax that allow you to set or create an encryption key and actually tell the database which encryption key you want to use. So you can create an encryption key using whatever algorithm you want, and as long as you've encoded this properly, this will be the key you use. For most encryption algorithms, any of the AES algorithms, ARIA or Ghost, you're going to have a hex-encoded 32-byte master key. For SEED, if you are using the SEED algorithm, you're going to have a 16-byte value for your master encryption key. Not part of advanced security, but very important, we have given you the ability now to encrypt credentials stored in linked $ and scheduler $ credentials. Both of these tables contain username and passwords that are used by the database to either do activity, scheduler jobs, or to connect to other database links. For several versions, we have obfuscated the data that's in those tables. It's not easy to just go out and read them, but at some point the data was still there. It was an unencrypted format, and so if you had access to those tables, you could go in and find usernames and passwords. What we've done in 18C is you can now encrypt that data so that it is harder for someone to get at. Behind the scenes, what we're using is transparent data encryption. You still have to have a key store and a master encryption key to use this capability, but it does not require an advanced security license. To enable this capability, it's going to be alter database dictionary, encrypt credentials. If you're using multi-tenant, you can do it across all containers or individual containers. Just like you can encrypt, you can rekey. There's alter database rekey credentials or alter database rekey credentials, container equal all. We've made some changes to encryption of data in motion, particularly around TLS or certificate-based encryption. SSL v3 has been considered insecure for a while. In 18C, we have now disabled SSL v3 by default. So you no longer have to go in and explicitly remove it. We are disabling it without you doing anything. If you need to restore it, you can add a parameter, add SSL v3 to default, set to true in your SQLnet.aura. As you can see here on the screen, we do not advise using this parameter. This would only be if you have a client that for some reason you can't upgrade and you're forced to continue to use SSL v3. Similarly, there's broad recognition that signed certificates using MD5 are no longer really secure. We have disabled the use of MD5 signed certificates by default in 18C. Again, if for some reason you can't use a more modern certificate, maybe you've got a really old client that can only use the old MD5 signatures, then we allow you to change this behavior, but you have to go out and do that in SQLnet.aura in SQLnet.aura. By default, we've turned this MD5 off. We're beginning to become concerned about SHA-1 signed certificates. There's some research that indicates we need to be getting rid of those. There are a lot of people still using SHA-1 signed certificates. As of 18C, we are not disabling them by default, but if you're at a case where you can move everything to SHA-512, we do now accept those stronger certificates, and we give you the capability to turn off accepting the older SHA-1 certificates, again with the parameter in your SQLnet.aura. Next thing we want to look at is Active Data Guard. Active Data Guard is a great feature in terms of reliability. It gives you a fantastic way to do disaster recovery, but there is a subtle little security issue with Active Data Guard that you want to be aware of, and that is if you have multiple replicas of a database, and these are logical standby rather than physical, you can log into them and do reporting, then you have the option or the capability for someone to say, I want to try and log into the production database, and I fail at that. I can now try and log into the standby database and then to another standby database. And depending on how you've got your password policies, they may be able to try more times to log in than you really want them to from a security standpoint. So in 18C, we give you a new parameter, Active Data Guard Account Info Tracking, that causes failed logins across your different replicas to become cumulative. So suppose I've got failed login count of 3. If I have 3 failed logins, I'm supposed to lock the database account. Someone tries a failed login on the primary database, someone tries a second one on the primary database, and then they switch to a replica. They try the third failed login, and because I've set this parameter, the total count is now 3, and this account is now locked. What I've taken you through is a sample of the new security features in 18C. What I hope you've taken away from this is that there is an enormous amount of functionality, new security functionality in 18C. Please take the time to review this new functionality, see what you can use in your organization, and if you're using any of these new features, I would love to hear from you about your experiences with them. Please drop me a note at russ.lowenthal@oracle.com. We'll now shift to our question and answer series, and I want to thank you in advance for those who don't have any questions for your time this month. I look forward to seeing you next month for Ask Tom, which will be on September 13th. But now I'll go ahead and open the lines up, and this is your time to ask questions.
Hi, Ross. This is Adrian. I just put a question on the chat.
Yes. Here we go. Let's see. If you have a primary database with HSM, can you have a secondary replicated with Active Data Guard without HSM? Ooh, it's going to depend on your HSM, Adrian. If your secondary isn't using an HSM, it does have to use the same master encryption key. So if your HSM allows the master encryption key to be exported to a wallet, Key Vault would do this, for example, then the answer would be yes. If your HSM does not allow the master encryption key to be exported, then the DataGuard replica would fail.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Good question. You know, Adrian, I'm thinking more about your question, and that new bring your own key functionality in 18C might be interesting for that. Because if I know the master encryption key that is in the HSM, if I set that on the replica in the wallet, I'd still have to be able to get the master encryption key out of the HSM. That's the problem. Most HSMs won't allow you to pull the master key out. So it's unlikely that it would work in most HSMs.
Okay, thank you.
Guys, if there aren't any questions, you can drop. I'm going to stay on for another 15 minutes just in case somebody does dial in with a question. It is supposed to be office hours. But I want to thank you for your time and talk to you next month on the September version of AskTOM. We haven't picked a topic yet. If you have a suggestion for a topic, please email it to me. But we hope to see you there, and I'll get the AskTOM website updated with whatever the topic we pick is here within the next week.
Was there a notification of the Key Vault BP7 being released?
Oh, absolutely. It was, let's see, we discussed it for the last 2 months in AskTOM, and it's also in my Oracle support. It shows up in the master note for Key Vault.
Oh, okay. I guess I didn't see it there.
It's hard to see it in my Oracle support. You get much better information from this session. So even if you don't care about the technical topic, if you stick on for the first 5 minutes, I cover all the product announcements. We have a question coming in on chat. This is from W. Cole. Can you do the AD integration and schema-only accounts in Oracle SE2? That is an excellent question, and I am going to look that up for you with you. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the Oracle documentation, and we are going to go to the bookshelf, and we're going to look for the license guide. And whenever I get one of these questions and I don't know the answer, which is frequently, all I have to do is go into licensing information, and here is the permitted features by Oracle Database Offering. So in this chart, we can see this is what's done in SC1, Enterprise Edition, things like that. So now let's see if we can find centrally managed users. Centrally managed users has a no in the SC1 column and a yes in these others. So no, it is not in SC2, but it is in XE. So if you just want to play with it without having to license Enterprise Edition, remember XE is free. Good question.
Community forums?
Ooh, schema only user. Almost certainly that is going to be there, but again, I'm going to do the same thing to check it. Let's see, is it schema dash only? Ooh, I have to find the feature. Oh, wow. All right. I'm drawing a blank on that one. Let me just check through. Let's see. I do not know. I will find out for you. So if you will switch to private for your chat, you could just use the drop down in 2 and send it just to me. If you'll send me your email address, I will investigate that and get back to you. And while we're doing that, I'm going to check one more thing. If someone else has a question, please break in. But just to see if I can find it, schema-only users are discussed in the security guide. Easy way to find it is right here. Oop, go back. I don't think we say anything here. No, it's not defined. All right, I'll have to investigate that one. Thanks, Bill.
For the patch releases, in the community forums for the OEM, I don't know who she is. She's an Oracle person that pretty much moderates the OEM one. She usually posts out when there's a bundle patch release. So it's usually easier to see in there. I don't know who runs the security one.
Let's see. We actually have individual product managers for each piece of it. For Key Vault, that would be SciCat. I know he has a mailing list, but I don't know who it goes to. I'll find out from him who it goes to.
Okay.
And Bill, I agree with you. The licensing has gotten much more complicated over the many years. I remember when this chart was just EE or SE, when there was nothing but 2 choices, and now look at it, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah. So Bill's continued to send this stuff to me privately that I do want to share. Bill, if you don't mind, that what Bill is saying is the documentation for the feature itself doesn't tell you this is an enterprise feature, this is a standard edition feature, this is an EE, XE, XCS, and it would sure be nice if it did. And I guess what I would say is if we did that, Bill, every single paragraph in all of the documentation would have this decision chart next to it. It would be kind of lengthy. You can see on the screen here just how many choices there are and how many different combinations. I'm not sure how we do that better. My complaint is usually just the opposite. Like when you asked me about schema-only accounts, is when I can't find it in here, then I really have no place to look, and I actually have to go back to our licensing team and get an answer from them. And it's hard. That's lawyers. You're talking to lawyers. They're getting an answer out of them is tough. But I agree. It would be nice if it was more comprehensive in one place or the other.